There we go. Well, first of all, I've got it on now, so we're recording. But where are you? Are you East Coast right now?
So I'm New York City and I just got in from Indonesia. I was doing some work
Hmm.
over in Bali. So I just got back to New York, which just means that I'm now completely awake between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m.
Yeah.
and exhausted the entire day. And I don't know how long this is going to last. But right now I'm in New York City, which is bizarre, but it's kind of wonderful to be home as well.
Well,
I,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's awesome that you're going to rock a podcast with me too, and being in the state. So we're just going to keep it relaxed. How about that, Dr. Belisa? Does that sound all right? To
Beautiful.
just kind
Yeah,
of just kick,
relaxed
yeah, let's kick the
and
feet up. Let's breathe a little bit. Let's talk a little bit, and let's have some great conversation. So, no, well, we have Dr. Belisa Vranich today is with us. Who I'm not going to lie, but I'm not done with the book. I am 100 so pages in. Breathing for Warriors. I read the first part of that. We connected, and now I'm stoked to have a podcast. The only reason why I did not finish the book before the podcast is because I'm taking a lot of notes. so
I
I,
love that.
yeah,
I
so
love that.
yeah, so I
Yeah.
have to. I felt really bad last night, realizing like I'm not going to just speed read this to feel accomplished, to be done with it, and to make sure that you and I have a finished book conversation. But no, it's been amazing so far, and I'm sure we'll dive into that. But before we do dive into that, can you give a little bit of a breakdown? I know you just mentioned the traveling part, but you've done way more than that book. You've written other books. You've been all over the place. Before we press play, we talked a ton about the spectrum of questions and fields that you've been in, which I cannot wait to pick your brain on. But can you give how, in the moment, how you are sort of simplifying what you do?
Sure. I mean, what I realize is that everybody thinks breathing is important.
Hmm.
However, we don't really actually know how we're doing it, and we have no way to measure it to see if that supposed deep breath is actually a deep breath. So when I started doing this, breathing was either like kind of mystical and yoga-y and things like that, or
Yeah.
it was very, very clinical. And you were talking about to a respiratory physiologist about the strength of a cough in someone who has pneumonia or being intubated. And there was no in between for sort of your average person that was just trying to get better or be optimized as far as their performance, whether that be speaking or in sports.
Yeah.
So I looked at it and I was thinking about, I am a
Yeah.
psychologist, but I was a psychologist and I worked doing psychometric testing, and now I'm doing biometric testing. But I was looking to see why this information wasn't out there and why it wasn't out there in vocabulary and with instructions that made sense to people. And I didn't find very much. And I sort of decided to put it together and really look at the words we were using and how that helps people understand or how it gets in the way. I was looking at the myths that people understand or misunderstand and how that gets in the way of breathing well. So I really deconstructed
Mm.
what we think about breathing
Hmm.
and then tried to rebuild and come up with a curriculum for being able to assess how we breathe, like in a functional way, and then give us exercises to be able to breathe better.
Yeah, that is, I mean, wow. I am so happy that that was how we started, because that was awesome to listen to. But you're so on, because I have a guy that I work with, and we were talking about reading, and I was explaining your book, right? Because when I picked up Breathing for Warriors, I really did think that it'd be something that I would just read start to finish, like I was reading a story. But it is almost like every page of it, there's so much in depth that goes along with breathing, and how you do break down the mechanics, how you have found ways to sort of measure the rib cage expansion, the compression, all that stuff, and then sort of tie that into how you move and how you think. What were the steps? Was that intuitive that got you into a position to really break down breathing like that, or what was sort of the steps you took to really simplify such a, I mean, it is sort of simple, but it's not. It's so complex of breathing. What was the thinking that made you go, I got to dive into this concept of breathing and make it tangible for people?
I have to first thank you for noticing that.
Hmm.
And that's sort of the way I work, where I'm really thorough, like obsessively
Yeah.
thorough. But then to teach, I'll teach in a way that's practical and almost makes so much sense that it feels simple.
Mm.
So if that's the impression you got, that's exactly what I wanted to do,
Right on.
which is that set it up for people. Like if you're the kind of person who's just like, tell me what to do, that's the book's fine for you, or what I teach is fine for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're the kind of the person who's like, hey, I want every academic article that supports how breathing can help blood pressure, that's there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I set it up for, the person who loves to geek out and loves academic articles, and also the person who's like, hey, just tell me what to do, because like life is short and I just rather do the exercises. I trust
Yeah.
you on the where it came from. But it comes from a lot of information. And that's why I almost drove myself really crazy with it, because
Sure.
when I started, I was just going to talk about endurance. And then I started thinking, well, strength training and powerlifting and breathing, it's so fascinating. And I have so many friends that powerlift. And then, of course, I thought, well, how can I leave out precision sports? And by that time, I was way deep down the
Right.
rabbit hole. And then I had to add a recovery and a resilience section. And by this point, my editor started freaking out, because now this was like started looking like a trilogy, and it was going to be the war and peace of breathing. But I finally put my foot down. I said, like, I can't go although I wanted to go into every single sport, I'm going to have to do
Right.
some sports, make references to all the other sports, and then hopefully be allowed to do a second version of this. But my goal was to make it both profound and simple at the same time. So that was very deliberate, and it was a hell of a lot of work, but I'm glad you got the impression
Oh
that I
yeah.
succeeded.
No, tremendously. I mean, that's what I mean. Going back to it, like and for people who are listening to this, I mean, go and we'll obviously share the book outside of the conversation, but uh, you'll read something, you'll read a page or two, and then you do a phenomenal job of the exact research article or scientific literature at the bottom. And that's where I think that my book might take me a while, because I'll go, oh, that was fascinating. I'm going to go right to that research and look that up now, and then, get deeper in the way I'm thinking about something. So you're right. I mean, you can take it simple. You can take things out of it and add it into your strength and conditioning right away. I mean, you can plug and pull, all those sort of things, or you can go, wow, that was a profound point. I'm going to look into that literature that she just provided for me. And that's what I've really enjoyed about it so far. That's why it's like, sure, it's a thorough book, but it's way deeper than the pages, the way I've seen it, than just inside of it, because you can be working on that thing. You can be working on a page or two for a few days. So it's,
Holy cow. Yep.
yeah, it's been really cool to read. And so, what interests me is your background in psychology, and a lot. And like I said, the thing before we press play, where I was so geeked out to talk to you, was that you do go across so many fields. Like I said, like the Joey Diaz. So you're on a comedic relief, professional athletes, the sex realm, the powerlifting realm, all these sort of things. And I think that is so cool, because I've always thought that being able to sit at the table with so many different genres of people and be able to add value to those conversations or ask questions is just super open-minded. So I've got to imagine, you're in that realm of thought. But what triggered you in your earlier days to kind of go down the rabbit hole of human thinking or human behaviors, and how have you sort of found ways to shift your language to all those different, people?
So, I mean, the being a psychologist,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to, I mean, I'll be perfectly honest, is that I didn't always want to be a psychologist. It wasn't like when I was 5 years old,
Sure.
I had a picture of Freud on my wall, or like, no, I actually, my major was in psychology with, it was a double major in French. And if you asked me what I wanted to do, like what I actually wanted to do in life, was I wanted to be a DJ and somehow use my French major, which of course my mother sat me down and said, you're going to starve. Don't do that. Because this was, in the late 80s, where DJs, there wasn't a lot of famous DJs. They didn't make a ton of money, and it wasn't like DJs nowadays. And it really was that I just loved music, and I loved the idea of being in a room with tons of records and being able to play what I wanted to.
Yeah.
So she was like, that's really nice. You can have that as a hobby, but you have to actually think of what you want to do as a career. So I actually, I'll admit this, is that I picked a career where I thought I would have summers off.
I love it.
Which was, sorry to
love
say it, this is like not the podcast you want your kids listening to about like how to be motivated. But I picked one. I decided to be a school psychologist because I loved kids.
Yeah.
Because I figured I could play a lot because kids play, and that I would have the summers off. And then I settled into being a psychologist and realized that I actually loved it. And I loved being able to do IQ testing, which was what my major was within psychology, was psychometrics. And that teaching was fascinating to me. So you could take one kid and teach them just, by reading a book and you sat and read together, and another child would not absorb any of the information that way. You had to sing it, or you had to make it rhyme, or like how you posed a question would help them answer it. And I really loved that, of like how little minds worked. Wow. And you know what, like as grownups, we're just little kids in adult bodies often, right? Or at least I think we're actually stuck as adolescents, most of us, in adult bodies, a lot of us. If we don't work at it, we kind of get stuck at age 13. But it made it interesting for me because every single kid that came in was different, and I needed the challenge and diversity. Like diversity is very important. I've had vocational ADD where I'm like, okay, I learned everything about this. Let me go on to the next job within psychology. So having a different person in front of me and a different problem has always been, exhausting, but wonderful to me because I just don't know what's coming. And I love that. Yeah. So, as a psychologist in practice, I always gave a lot of homework. So when somebody came in and they just wanted to vent, regardless of what they wanted to pay me, I'd say, you know what, I'm not your shrink, because I'm bored silly listening to you vent. I mean, not that venting doesn't have a place within therapy as well, but you can't just vent. Sure. But I would give a lot of homework. So I would say, you have to journal, you have to do volunteer work, you have to do some kind of martial art, I'd have a whole list of things they had to do. And the people that loved that because they had homework to do and felt empowered, like those were my folks. And they would get better and they would kind of graduate and go on and live their lives. It was not a good business model for psychologists, but definitely more fulfilling for me. And the breathing came in that I was dealing with my own stress because especially in New York City, we thrive on stress, but I was trying to manage my own stress. And a friend of mine said, hey, there's this guy named David Elliott out in New Mexico teaching breathing. Do you want to go? And I was like, oh my God, no, that sounds so corny. I definitely don't want to go to New Mexico to breathe. I have more important things to do. So, a couple months later, I go to the dentist. I find out I'm super grinding my teeth. And I don't mean like just a little bit, but I'm really, really doing damage to my jaw, grinding my teeth. Yeah. So I had to figure out my own stress. Long story short, I ended up taking this class out in New Mexico, which was really super interesting, along with the breathing that we did in yoga class. But I was still the one that really wanted more of the mechanics and the sports science. Right. So that led me to, delve into all the sports science literature that talked about breathing and, breathing in sports. So that's kind of the long story there.
Yeah, there's a lot that is circling through my head on the process, and I want to hold off on the breathing in sports because that'll be easy, I think, for us to go down rabbit holes together on that. But you said something that really sparked my interest about how young ages and the diversity in learning a different problem for all sorts of people, right? And I thought that was so cool, and I want to take you back to that and think of it as, something that I've pondered over for a long time is how do we learn how to learn, right? So we're in positions where we're all learning. Like this specific podcast for me, I'm learning from you throughout the whole thing regardless, right? I'm getting your experiences, your stories. Now I'm getting your current moment wisdom and all those sort of things. But how do we as individuals learn how to learn? And I don't know if I have an answer for that. It's something I'm very curious about. And when the way that you explain that, I would just love to get your take on through all of your experiences from children, adults, athletes. I'm sure we could be here till tomorrow to name all the people you've worked with. So, but how have you figured out how to identify problems for diverse groups and help individuals learn how to learn?
So that has to do with being a psychologist
Mm-hmm.
and being really in tune with the person in front of me. So for instance, if I'm talking to you
Yeah.
and you blink during a certain part of the sentence, to me that means that you've probably had a thought, or your eyes are dry. Again, like there's never one answer,
Sure.
but you probably had a thought that you're not interrupting me, but you've had. Um, and then I'd probably say, "Hey, what was that? Did you just think something?" And again, it's intuition that has to do with, 20 years of working with
Right.
different people. But it's where you look at the person and you realize, and I know this has happened to you, where, oh, they've gone flat on me, they've checked out.
Mm-hmm.
So however I'm talking isn't resonating with them.
Mm-hmm.
Or you see them, and I know that, for instance, I was watching, I love UFC, and I was watching a fight the other day. What was the kid's name? He was an Irish kid with a lot of tattoos. It was his comeback fight after 2 years. He
Oh, Conor McGregor?
tested. No, it wasn't McGregor. It was this really wily kid, like Sean.
Oh, Sean, I know who you're talking about. Does he have cornrows?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
lots of tattoos, and he had a
Yeah.
really distinctive way of fighting. But like,
Yeah.
I just loved watching him fight. He was fighting against someone from Mexico. Anyway, so they call him up to speak to him at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the fight,
Mm-hmm.
and I look at him and I go, he's going to cry. And my friends were like, he's not crying. He's like, he just won the fight. He's totally hardcore. And like 30 seconds later, they ask him something, and he just, he puts his head down, and he like shed one tear or just got choked up.
Sure.
And they're like, how did you know that? And I said, because you can tell, like, if you're really in tune with someone, you can tell how they're pulling in information and how they're responding to you by their vibe, their eyes, their face, and you can tell words that upset them or words that make sense to them. So if you really cue into that, and that's what I do for a living. I mean, there's,
Yeah.
I could make a list of things I can't do, a big long list, but that
You can do.
I can do.
That is fascinating. Does that ever get like, what is it like when you're with your friends and you're watching an event and maybe the people you're with aren't at that level of awareness or acknowledgement or something like that? Does that ever become, was that hard at some point in your career where you maybe aren't even able to turn that off? Or is that always exciting?
Nah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's always like there's other people there who are commenting on the fight with things
Sure.
that I have no idea about, or there's people that know statistics about past fights of the people that are fighting.
Yeah.
So we're all throwing in all kinds of information, and I mean, honestly, what I do can be so sort of a fringe
Mm-hmm.
that my friends appreciate it, but often it's so specific and so Rain Man-ish
Yeah.
that I'm used to kind of feeling a little bit of a little bit of an outlier, and most people who are my friends kind of appreciate that I'm pretty quirky, and and they appreciate it, which is like, you should always surround yourself by people who don't judge you and appreciate your quirkiness. Yeah.
Oh, tremendously. No, I love it. I mean, that's why I was all jacked up to talk to you. I knew I would vibe out with you. I was like, well, this will be super relaxing and fun to just ask some questions and just hear some stuff. So, no, I think of it as sometimes like breathing. Do you feel like you can't walk in public without watching people's breathing? Like, does your mind or eye go to that all the time? Do you sort of feel that or recognize that?
Yeah, and that happens more because of people's interest now than anything else. Because when I first started teaching,
Mm-hmm.
I was still doing therapy and I was teaching breathing, and I usually had people kind of roll their eyes when I said I taught breathing. I still didn't even quite know how to describe it.
Yeah.
But they sort of like kind of give me this like pitiful look, like, oh, that's sweet. Don't quit your day job. And now it's it's gotten trendy, and it's really strange for me that I am actually doing something that's trendy.
Right.
Not used to that.
Right.
So now it's, if I say that I teach breathing, I get bombarded with questions, and that didn't happen before. So it's almost that I have to pick when I say it or if I say it, because it's going to end up being a session. And I know that I always mention, when I go to LA, one of the things that's made LA tolerable for me is that Ubers in LA. Because I don't drive. I'm a New Yorker. And I mean, I can drive, I just shouldn't.
Yeah.
I'm fully aware that I should not be driving.
Yeah.
So in LA, in Ubers, I often do interviews or take questions, or I'm talking in Ubers. And what will happen is that I'd say 80%, 8 out of 10 times, the Uber driver will start listening. At the end of the conversation, will ask me a couple, will politely say, hey, do you mind? I wasn't meaning to listen, but like,
Right.
I had a gunshot wound in my left lung, or like I broke a rib and I've been trying to stop smoking, or what about the training mask? And like, they'll ask questions. And I think, so it's not really about me anymore. It's more that people really have a lot of questions and are very interested. And that's super exciting.
Oh, it's extremely exciting. And I think to kind of segue into that, why, I mean, I have my theories on why breathing sort of exploded. I was introduced to, so maybe I can tie this in to tee you up. When I was playing baseball, I got introduced to the sports psych world in my grad degree in 2012 and 13. And then I got into professional baseball, and we would always mention breathing, but we would never get to the depths of breathing, right? And there were some things that went along with that, but it always stuck with me. And then when I got out of baseball in 2015, I had a buddy of mine, similar story to yours almost. I had a buddy of mine who introduced me to Wim Hof, right, which is made it who's worldly known at this point. So I did breathing practices and cold every day for a couple weeks, and then I went into it, and it just spiral affected into all sorts of things. I became obsessed with breath work and learning it and teaching it and mechanically understanding it and all that sort of things. But I didn't notice it really even being that much. It wasn't really getting questioned that much in 2015. I don't really know when it necessarily happened, but when do you think the switch was in the world or athletics? Like, when did you really start noticing that people were really into this?
I would say probably, my first book on breathing came out in 2012. So, and it was starting to pick up then. But the reason it's peaked is that a combination of a whole bunch of different factors, not to get all Malcolm Gladwell on you,
Sure.
but is that the research on breathing has been out, but it takes a good 5 to 8 years for it to get in the front lines. And that's when it was starting to kind of trickle down and get into more popular places. And now what we're going to see is we're actually going to see it, coaches pick it up and bring it to athletes. But it's been a matter of all these different things starting to accumulate, both books that are out there, different breathing people, and all their different ways of teaching breathing, the academic studies. And, it's all sort of culminated with now. And actually, let me add to that, is that our being disillusioned with the medical system has also brought us here. So It's not just, books and academic things. It's also sort of our medical and health climate, is that we've become disillusioned with pharmaceuticals. So that's why we're actually now, into supplements so much. But
Right.
I think we started to say, hey, I'm not being served well by medicine. What else can I find? And what else is there? So there's a return to basics that I think people feel intuitively of, this isn't working. I'm taking so much medicine. I still don't feel good. Like, let me keep looking to see what is going to make me feel better. And the answer to that is breathing, because it's the foundation. So you can take all kinds of great supplements and, do all kinds of wonderful things. And I do mean that. But if your breathing isn't good, it's just the foundation for everything else. So you have to start with how well you breathe.
Yeah, and so you kind of break it down in the book too, in sort of a meditative, cellular, and then mechanical side, and then obviously the mechanical side is huge. You mentioned this a little earlier about how when you went to New Mexico or you had the opportunity, it was kind of like it's yogi-ish, and I don't see as much of that anymore. Where I think people are excited to understand breathing, but it still does have that umbrella effect, right? Where you can see, okay, there's this yogi monk in the cave. I get it. But at the same time, you talk about lifting heavy weight and breathing, and then seeing meditation kind of as a byproduct of that. And you're tying so many things around a singular focus of breath work. What would you kind of say to help people move past that framing of what their perceptions about avoiding breathing are, and how they can kind of break that and sort of start learning things on their own and start trying on their own to kind of get to that awareness level to work on their breathing?
Well, I think that's why I came up with the breathing IQ,
Mm-hmm.
is because and everything I talk about in the book, um, you don't necessarily have to buy the book. And I always say this: if your public library doesn't have my book, please have the library reach out to me and I'll send them one.
Mm-hmm.
And also, although I would love for you to buy the book, you don't have to buy the book. I do a ton of podcasts. I have a lot of information on my website,
Yeah.
and my mission is for people to be able to do exactly what you just said, which is, empower themselves with information and change their own breathing given the information that they've learned. So to get to care about it and understand what it can do for them. So the breathing IQ came from my doing IQ testing. So
Okay.
when you do IQ testing, you come up with it's a battery of tests. I don't know if you've ever had your IQ done, but it's a really lengthy process.
Mm-hmm.
But usually you get what's called an IEP, which is an educational plan, where you address, you find out what your strengths are, you find out what your weaknesses are, and the psychologist comes up with a plan for how you can just get to be a better thinker and a better learner. So I realized that with breathing that we didn't actually know how well we were doing. So if you tell someone to take a deep breath, well, they just, look up to the ceiling and spread their arms and puff up their chest, and everybody thinks that's a deep breath, because that's sort of what we've been told is a deep breath.
Right,
and the
right.
fact is that if you don't have, like, Gray Cook did a beautiful job with his FMS in teaching us how to assess our movement. So I thought, well, if I could do that with the breath, since the breath is a movement, that would help people understand whether they were breathing well or not. So if they could get a number or a grade on the biomechanics of their breathing, then they can fix it. So what came about was the breathing IQ. And I'm very happy with it because it's a functional measurement in that it teaches you what a good breath at the same time that you're assessing it. So usually with breathing, you go in to see a pulmonologist and they do what's called spirometry on you. So they look at your lung capacity and your lung velocity.
Okay.
So I work a lot with firefighters.
Okay.
And I'll say, well, what's your spirometry? What's this number? Or with people that come in with pulmonary problems. And most of them will say, I don't know. I was told I was fine. So you know what? Like, if I'm going to get a test taken and it's going to be about my lungs, I want to know that number, and I want the doctor to explain it to me and to give me exercises about how to make it better.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So that's what I wanted to do, is to have a functional measurement that gave people information while they were taking the test about what they had to do better. And that made total sense. So it has an educational component. It made sense, and it almost was like they couldn't forget that information. And it's almost like you get automatically a little obsessed because it makes so much sense.
Yeah,
And that's what the
yeah.
breathing IQ is.
Yeah. Well, you also add progression to to breathing. One of the things that we kind of touched on briefly in the beginning, but with psychological work or mental training, going back to the baseball realm, you've been around the baseball world of how much they talk about sports psych or golf or tennis, whatever that is, right? And what's never made sense to me was, if we know how important the mind is, how do we progress it, right? If I go to a strength trainer and I bench more, well, then that strength trainer just wins, right? Where you've kind of taken breathing and you've made it progressive, which is where I think you get people will keep coming back, right? Because the high level of happiness is finding progress, so you can progress your breathing and you can do it through that IQ. Like I can get a baseline of where I'm at and be able to make that stronger. Am I sort of on the right track there?
You're right. It's perfect. Success begets success.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can own your success, which is your breathing,
Mm-hmm.
and do it well, and then it's intuitive or,
Yeah.
a little prescriptive about here's how I make it better. Well, then you have someone who it's a combination of things. All of a sudden they believe in their body again,
Yeah.
where they might
Oh,
not
I love
have
that.
before.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. They feel better immediately, like within seconds. And they're a little confused about it. And they're wondering, is this going to last? But
Yeah.
it is going to last, and you can make it even better. And then there's things they can do, because you mentioned this before, is that in sports, we mention breathing all the time, but you never go into depth. Like coaches, and it's not their fault, it's just
Right.
they haven't been trained in it,
Right.
don't go into depth about, well, what does that mean and what can I do? So I was really looking for, here I have a group of people that absolutely know that breathing is important, except for nobody has the information about, well, what can I do about it? Unless it's, you want to do, trance breath-led meditation, or if you have emphysema, what about all of us, that may not be at those extremes of the spectrum?
Right. Yeah. So how would you sort of simplify that I know you touch on that too in the book part of it, but how would you simplify for athlete or general pop? I guess this is too broad of a question, but how would you, how would somebody who is a good breather improve breathing and somebody who's way off? Like how would you sort of take those people and train specific categories of bodies, or help people just kind of start at the beginning and progress as needed? We'll look at someone who's overweight and has health issues.
Sure.
Yeah, go with that a
That's
little bit.
like what's nice about this is that it's actually it's a complex topic, but
Okay.
it's so easy. So which can exist at the same time,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is the first thing you're going to do. And I want you to think about the gym model. And again, like that's where I come from, is the gym model and the
Right.
sports model, because that's where I come from. So if you're training someone to squat well, the last thing you're going to do is just load them up and throw them in, right? The
Right.
first thing you're going to do is have them squat with no weight or light weight and fix their posture, right? Make sure everything's aligned. So why not do the same damn thing with breathing? Is like, let's look at how you breathe, because it is a movement. Your body is moving. Let's make sure your body is moving right and you're using the right muscles. So totally not brain surgery. It's almost like so ridiculously simple. Like I don't have to use huge words to explain that.
Sure.
It's just like inhaling and exhaling. There's a movement of your body. Are you doing it right? And the first thing you have to overcome is this idea that breathing is natural, so I must be doing it right. So that stigma is harder to get over than the actual starting to correct things. Because how many people come in and go like, oh, breathing is natural, so I must be doing it right. And the fact is that we human beings are incredibly resilient.
Right.
We are like super tough, super tough when we have to be. So we can actually survive on the shittiest breathing. Like you can be breathing really badly and still, limp along for decades. But maybe you don't want to limp along. Maybe
Right,
you
right.
want to optimize. Maybe you are an athlete. Maybe you're looking at your parents and you're like, I don't want to wheeze like that. I want to be able to, I don't want to. Most of us don't really want to get a lot older. We just want to be able to get old and still be really, really functional and healthy. So we're looking at our parents and going like, I don't want to be that way at that age. And I'm not being insulting.
No, not at
and I
all.
actually happen to have a mom who's 85, who's rock star.
Love it.
But most of us are looking at our parents and saying like, do we have to be like that? Because I don't really want to live to be 120 and be like that.
Right. I mean, what's the point of that?
Yeah. Like I want to be able to, and it's great. I get people who are coming in and they're like 60, 70, 80, and they're going like, I want to keep playing tennis.
I love
and I
it.
love that person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or that person who goes, hey, I now have realized that just climbing to the top of my stairs, I can't breathe. And I don't want to, I want to fix that. And I know I don't know if you can fix it, but I'd like to try. And that's amazing. So the first thing you have to do is look to see, are you actually taking a diaphragmatic breath? Because too many people think that they spread their arms out, they puff up their chest, they look out into the distance, and that's a deep breath. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. So just like you would assess a movement or anything else, is like, let's look at the movement of your body and if you're using your diaphragm. Because over the last, I'd say 40 years, we're not using our diaphragm as much as we should. It's called inhibited, but we've actually taken a muscle that's extremely important for a dozen different reasons, for your digestion, for gut health, for your spine health, for your nervous system, and we've taken it out of the equation. And this is where I get really passionate. You may have to lower the volume because I get really heated about this.
Doc.
Is that
Let it rip.
Yeah. If you take this huge muscle in the middle of your body that has ripple effects above it and below it, and you just kind of like slide it out of the body and don't use it as much as you should, well, the machine is going to break down. So the digestive problems we see, the lower back problems we see, the anxiety that we see has to do at least in part with the fact that 10 pounds of breathing muscle that's in the middle of your body is not being used the way it should be, or the way we were designed, really.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, is to look at the mechanics of your breathing. Are you an A? Then you're good. You're using your diaphragm. Now we can strengthen those muscles. But just like at the gym, get your posture right and then start adding weight. And that's exactly the same thing that we're doing with breathing.
So does just deep diaphragmatic breathing, is that alone strengthening the diaphragm? I know you talk about how there's no nerve feeling in there, so you don't feel it getting sore necessarily. But if I'm breathing, let's say I'm doing really well mechanically the whole day, and I've made it somewhat of an unconscious thing, I'm just mechanically sound, is that going to naturally strengthen the diaphragm, or do I need
Not
to?
necessarily.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's a lot of some stuff you can take me deeper into that question.
Yeah. Well, it's like saying like, okay, well, I walk a lot, and
Right.
that's good, but and that is going to be good for you because walking is good for you. But if you're really trying to strengthen your
stress it,
cardio,
right?
yeah, you actually have to overload it. So thank you for saying that, which is that. So I'll have people who come in, and sometimes their mechanics are fantastic. They're like an A or a B, which is pretty not as common as you'd think. But then we go to strengthen their breathing muscles, and their breathing muscles are not they're not strong. And that's really fascinating, because if I get someone who comes in and they're an A or a B, and now we have to strengthen their breathing muscles, I mean, I'm just giddy, because their performance is going to change immediately. So their breathing muscles getting strong, the impact on their sport. And again, I don't use sport as like necessarily a pro athlete, but as a jogger, like, I don't even know, do we say jogging anymore? But like as a runner, or as like someone who does Spartan races or whatever you do, is that your performance is going to change immediately. And immediately, I mean like 2 weeks, because 2 weeks is, as we know, it could be very long. Right now, it's feeling very long.
That's a great point. Great dynamite drop in.
Right. But is that you can strengthen your breathing muscles and see a change in your performance after 14 days is just mind-blowing. So no, you actually have to strengthen the breathing muscles and overload them. So I'm super happy that you mentioned overloading them, because if you're walking or even running, you have to overload your breathing muscles completely separate from your sport. And that, especially when I do get someone who's a high performer or an athlete, really a pro athlete, that they can have weak breathing muscles is mind-blowing to them, because usually it's a person who's like really high performer, very motivated, very tough, and all of a sudden we start breathing exercises and they're having a hard time, which is it's humbling, which is always good, but it's also super interesting to see someone who's always performed really well, is really talented, well coached, and all of a sudden, they realize they're doing exhale pulsations.
Right.
Holy cow, I've got some work to do. And I always say that's great news. Like, it's not like a secret weapon or, but it is something that's going to give you an advantage, because you haven't worked it out. So what is your performance going to look like once you work out your breathing muscles? It's pretty wild.
It is wild. Well, so looking at that and the breathing side of it, if you're doing professional athlete, high performer, does aerobic training, strength and conditioning, their actual specific craft. And so you're suggesting that there should also be a category of specific breath training.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
if 10 pounds of muscle, like think about going to the gym and going, yeah, I'm
No,
not going to
that
work out
blows
my
my
left
mind.
glute.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have to nail it. No, you're right. I don't
10
mean to
pounds.
take you off on that, but it's
No, not at all. But like, I think it's really interesting if people think, oh, I must be doing breathing exercises as I'm running because I'm breathing.
right.
And you don't have to, when I talk to a lot of coaches, they're like, listen, I've got my folks for a certain amount of time.
Right.
I
Yeah.
can't, I actually, who was it? I had this one coach say, like, I can't walk into a gym and see my guys on the floor blowing up balloons. Like, I can't do that,
Can't wrap
And I
his
said,
head
I
around
hear
it.
you.
Yeah.
And I said, I completely understand because that comes from PRI and a really brilliant guy named Ron Huska. And it's great stuff. However, I get it. If you're a strength and conditioning coach and you have a team for a short amount of time and trying to get everything you need to in that time,
Right.
you can't be doing things. You have to be maximizing your time. And what I'm saying is that you can do 10 minutes of really hard breathing exercises and be able to see benefit from that. So yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, and it's just getting intelligent too. And I'm sure you've had to have that conversation so many times, but it's just getting intelligent because if you're improving the breathing, well, then you're improving something else, so it's in looking at time, I would just think to get more aware of your time. I mean, if I am strengthening my diaphragm or I'm increasing the lung capacity and I'm doing any of that stuff, wouldn't I see a benefit of my running? Like, wouldn't I have to spend less time running?
And you see it right away. So
Yeah.
I always ask people, I say, okay, breathing is like, you can't see your lungs, you can't feel your diaphragm,
Mm-hmm.
but I actually want you to give me a measure of your endurance. So it can be on a run where you start mouth breathing. It can be on a run or stairs when you hit that wall.
Sure.
It could, like, I don't care. It can be a number. It can be your row time. But give me a number because that number is going to change. And I want you to see the number change. I don't want you to go by me.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to see your own number change. So I'm really specific about that.
I really like that. I was doing the row. I was practicing some of the rows yesterday in the garage with the inhale at the catch, exhale at the drive, which I think I've always done that. And I don't know if I've paid enough attention to it. And then same thing with kettlebell swings. But then you also have mentioned a little bit about how you can be counterintuitive to that, or you can do the opposite of that as well, where you could sort of inhale, drive, exhale, catch. Do you know what part I'm talking about?
Yeah, and I love rowing. Ever since this book, I've gotten super obsessed with rowing.
Nice.
It's now my go-to
Nice.
for cardio. But what I'm going to tell you is that, so here's what's interesting with rowing is
Mm-hmm.
that we've divided it into a vertical. So if you look at the rower and yourself on the rower,
Yeah.
is that we've divided that the left side is an inhale and the right side is an exhale, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's actually more, you need to take that line and kind of pivot it so that, and you can play with this because it's almost like I need to be with you with the rower, is
Yeah.
that it's not divided along a vertical line. It's almost though the inhale and the exhale, it's almost, it's so hard to describe, but just watch to see what feels right, because sometimes when your arms are way ahead of you and you're opening up your back, that's where the inhale comes. And then the exhale is a push of your feet and then your arms pulling towards you.
I'm doing
So
it
when
right
you
now in airtime. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. We need that video. That'd be hilarious to see you in airtime.
No one
But
should be
once
on
you
it.
start,
Yeah.
once you start considering the breath and really looking at it, you'll get obsessed. You'll realize, oh, my inhale isn't forwards. My inhale when I'm rowing, Often it's a lot more like someone who's on a bicycle,
Yeah.
where your inhale is almost like your lats and your back opening up.
Mm.
And if your arms are in front of you, it actually encourages you to open up your back on that inhale. And then the exhale is almost like a two-part exhale. So you exhale as you push your feet, but then the last part of the row, you're pulling the bar towards your body,
Yep.
which should be an exhale as well.
Oh, is that a smooth exhale, or you kind of say that two part? Is that a
In your brain, it's two-part.
okay?
Now, here we're going to throw in a couple other variables. And if you guys are listening and you're geeking out on this, try it, because it gets really interesting.
It is.
And if you're not, just fast forward and you'll be like, I don't know what they're talking about rowing. But whatever is that.
Yeah, I completely apologize to the listeners. I got extremely selfish there. I apologize, guys.
That's okay. So the other thing you're going to throw in there, once you've got really good mechanics for the row, because I've seen some really bad mechanics, like you have to have good mechanics. And once you've got your pace for the row, you're going to throw in, okay, like, am I doing nose? Have I now switched to nose mouth? Am I at mouth because it's the last minute?
Right.
When you should, like when it's the thick of things and you're trying to beat your own time, you should be at mouth because you should be. And then you're going to look at, am I doing one breath per stroke, or am I doing two breaths? Have I now changed so it's exhale at the catch, exhale at the pull? So that gives you a lot of homework to go play with it.
Oh, it does.
Let me go see my times when I stay nose mouth, or when I, how long do I have to wait before I go to mouth, or I actually call it nasal buckle, where you're actually breathing through your nose and your mouth simultaneously. And what happens if it's two breaths? Because think of a wall ball.
Yeah.
In the beginning, you're exhaling as you throw the ball up against the wall, right? Once it gets harder, you're doing exhale as you catch it and sturdy yourself. You're doing two exhales.
That is, so I've been trying to do that. I've been trying to time up my exhales just on running in the last week. And I think that's what's helping me comprehend what you're saying.
Yep.
And so, because I'm thinking about, okay, so let me switch gears and I'll try to get more broad for people who are listening and get away from my selfish desires. But so like in sports, you see, I'll go to a pitcher. You'll see a pitcher who takes a big inhale, and I see like a half exhale, and then they start moving. And I've always tried to look at the timing of, well, when are they bracing? Do they actually, like, why wouldn't they extend that exhale? Or what are they trying to get out of that breath? Because you've mentioned this a lot, and I think we so often intuitively tell people to breathe in so many situations, and calming down, and strength and conditioning, and taking a test, whatever. Just the common response from anybody is, hey, just breathe. And then you do see that upper chest, that shoulder rise, that neck activation and all that stuff. And you see them just kind of have a choppy breath. But then it's like, well, you miss out on the cellular side of that, and then also the mechanical side of that. And so I'm just trying to think across the spectrum of sports should you almost get a breath out before you go into any sort of movement? Like if I'm hovering over a face-off in hockey, should I get a full breath, and then should I brace for the puck drop, or brace for I'm about to start pitching? Is that making sense?
It's totally making sense. And we can go to, like, let's just stay with pitching for a moment, because it's so different than hockey. And these are the conversations I love, is comparing sports. I mean, this is just, I'm like a pig in shit. Like, I love this stuff.
Yeah.
So with any sport, the fluidity of your movement is going to be dictated by the pairing of the movement with your breath. So you're going to have a smooth movement if your breath is going along with it. And you don't have to think about it. It's not an additional mechanic, because God knows, like with sports that have lots of mechanics, the last thing you need is another mechanic.
Right.
It actually stops you from thinking about the mechanics, and it lets you do things naturally. So that's the kind of a second answer to that question.
I love that. So can you say that again?
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's use like golf as an example.
Okay.
Is that when you golf, and I golf, I'm a terrible golfer, but I like it.
Yeah.
but you're standing over the ball and you've got, volumes of information coming through your head that you should be doing.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And everybody's like telling you what to do this, do that, do the other thing. And if you add breathing as another thing you have to do, then it becomes overwhelming.
Yeah, it doesn't
But
work
what the
out.
breath can be is the thing that lets you do what you do naturally and what you've been training for. So if you look at breathing for warriors, and I'll describe this now, you don't have to have it, is that I call it targeted breathing, which is that there are moments when the breath helps you not think about the mechanics and just go to everything that you've practiced and that you know what to do. And that's the middle of the target. So think about when you're fighting. People always ask me, like, when I'm in the ring and I'm, fighting, how should I be breathing? And the fact is that once you start thinking about your breathing when you're in the ring, when you're right up on someone, if you're thinking about your breathing, you're in trouble.
Yep.
You should be on complete automatic. Right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're a safe amount of distance away from them, you can actually think about taking a breath, like unbracing your body because it might be safe to for a second. When you're, sitting on opposite parts of the ring, you obviously should be thinking about your breathing, and then you have to think about your breathing outside the ring, being able to heal and recover for the next day. But you have to think about breathing is targeted, of like, what part of my sport am I in and how should I be thinking about my breathing? So the breathing and the sound of your breath can stop you from getting to that place where you get anxious because you're trying to manage all your mechanics.
I love that. So to get deep in here, maybe I don't think this will take us off track, but I love how you just mentioned the sound part of it. Do you ever think that the breathing, so I got to come from my head here. So this is where it could get a little deep, mystical here. But I mean, you're talking about like a subconscious thing, right? Like it's an automatic movement. If you've practiced this for so long, I've always sort of thought that the breathing is the language of your memory, your mind, what's going on. And it's not actually your brain that goes first or your thinking that goes first, it's your breathing. So if we could train at an awareness level of, okay, I'm going to practice mechanical breathing until I can make that just like any other skill, just like swinging or throwing a ball, whatever, and then trust that. And then when I'm in a flow of a competition, or it doesn't just have to be sports, of anything, if I have a higher threshold to positive breathing, to flowish breathing, movement with my breathing, then my fear centers of my brain are just turned off longer.
Exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
Nice. So that was good.
I couldn't have said it better. And I'm so glad you mentioned the word flow, because flow is one of those words that, like, everybody agrees flow is important, but no one has the exact recipe for how to get at it.
Right.
And I'm not sure that the breath is the exact recipe. I think it probably is a combination of, peppering of different things in a very precise recipe. However, that your breathing be aligned with what you're doing and that you be using it to keep your arousal where you want it to be, that is flow. So I truly do believe that how you're breathing and how you harness your breath gives you access to flow.
I love that. Well, and I do love, because flow that's like the thing, right? That's what we try to understand or get more of. And that kind of takes us back to even the beginning of our conversation about your background in psychology, because that never made sense to me. Like, it never made sense to me to be able to talk yourself into flow. And I would always get hammered with mental training, because like I said, that's huge in baseball. For anyone who's listening doesn't know baseball, that's a big part of baseball. We train the mental game. And I never understood, well, there's so much circulating through my head of habitual thinking, positive thinking, negative thinking. I got the concepts of goal setting and vision setting, all that stuff to try to acquire flow. But I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can talk yourself into things, but you could breathe yourself into things.
I can't even add to that. Frankly, I think it's what you just said was perfect.
So Fergus Conley said something to me a month or two ago that just blew my mind. And he was talking about how psychology is unsolved physiology. And then your book, and I shouldn't just keep saying your book because you talk about this, you're much more than just that book, right? There's a lot of different spectrums, but there's so much to dive into this. And this is where it's like, when we look at breathing as a concept of it's a yogi, you have to be whatever you want to think of it. I mean, there's such in-depth flow. If you're mechanically sound, from your background, wouldn't that's going to trigger up to your brain, and you're going to feel sound, you're going to think soundly, and it all does start at the breathing.
I've always said it's the mind-body connection. Like we
Mm-hmm.
keep trying to connect the mind and the body without having a practical breath. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that is the connection between the mind. It is that thing. It's
Yeah.
like, it's so simple, is that your mind and your body, they are connected and speak to each other through the breath. So,
Yeah, no, you got me
and
so jacked
yeah.
up right now. I actually am really excited to go lift. Well, I just think I'm excited to go test the breathing with those sort of things. So when you're stressing breath practice, like when you're doing a breath practice without giving away all your nuggets,
Go ahead. No, please give them away.
well,
Like really.
what would a breathing session look if you had an experienced breather? So you had someone who practices breathing, those sort of things. Like what sort of time or blueprint do you sort of have as your general protocol, and how does that look if you were to just do a breathing practice?
So it depends what you're coming in to see me for. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm always going to look at your mechanics and the strength of your muscles,
Mm-hmm.
period. And that's something that everybody can do, is like get your mechanics right
Yeah.
and get your breathing muscles strong. But if I have somebody come in and they are, for instance, a power lifter,
Okay.
I'm going to do something very different. And you brought this up before. You said depending on the person's body. So let's talk about that, because
Okay.
that's really interesting. So your power lifter is going to have an excellent inhale and the worst exhale you can possibly see. And they're amazing to work with, because their inhales are so damn good
Yeah.
as compared to the rest of the population. And their exhales are the worst I've ever seen. And it's odd to have a person that has those two things.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you can think about this. Your average power lifter is going to know how to do a diaphragmatic breath. They're going to know that, because
Sure.
that's what they do all the time, is inhale and widen. Now, here's the problem, is that their exhale is not going to be a narrowing, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to
So,
visualize. Because you're right. Like if I'm gonna deadlift, are you talking like
yes,
and they can get that full brace?
yes.
I'm so happy you bring that up, because I wanted to ask you about this. Yeah, go ahead.
And that's why I think you spoke to Casey, and Casey was someone from Summer Strong or Winter
Yeah,
Strong,
yeah,
who I looked at him. I'm like, no, I actually remember speaking to him and saying, his inhale was great, but I said, you have so much residual air in your body, you can't take another inhale because you haven't exhaled. And having been a power lifter, his exhale was not a narrowing, because he didn't ever narrow. You don't narrow you brace when you power lift or you push against the belt, but you never narrow your body. So compare that to a bodybuilder. A bodybuilder so knows how to narrow. They will just narrow till the cows come home, because that's the physique that you want.
Oh yeah.
But getting my bodybuilders to inhale and expand, I mean, I almost have to promise them that they will go back and be able to narrow, because it's such a mind-blowing concept. What, I'm going to inhale and widen my middle? Why the hell would I want to do that? But that's why you have to consider body types and what the person is coming in for. So let's talk about precision sports, because that's almost exactly the opposite of endurance sports, is that if I have a golfer, they're probably not that interested in endurance.
Sure.
Pitchers are. Like, people go, oh, pitchers don't need endurance. I'm like, actually, they absolutely do need endurance. And this is that you have to have endurance when you're a pitcher, but you want to have joint friendly cardio or exercises. You don't want to have to get your endurance on something by wearing out your body.
Sure.
So pitchers are separate. We can go to that in a second. But when you have a precision athlete, so I'm talking about golf, range shooting, pool, like anything where you are having to be precise, you don't necessarily need endurance and you don't necessarily need strength. But what you do need is to be able to recognize what's called your natural respiratory pause. And you have to be able to lengthen that. So that's a completely different exercise. When it comes to precision sports, I'm going to look at how much can you lengthen your exhale? How much can you control your exhale muscles? Because that pause, and it usually should happen when your heartbeat is the lowest, that's when you're going to shoot, fire, strike, whatever.
Yeah, that's super. That's what a powerful visual too. So, and that was kind of my question. Can you take that precision breathing and put that in the middle of a power lifter and bodybuilder? Like, should you be exchanging full breaths in sports to some degree?
Not full breaths.
Okay.
I mean, when you're in the ring, you don't want to be taking a full inhale or full exhale. You have to be what's called hovering. And you also, when you're doing your sport, you're probably going to be bracing and having to consider your center of gravity. Now, this is where stuff gets super interesting, is that your diaphragm is your main muscle of balance, but it's also your main muscle of breathing. So you have to negotiate that of, I need to be able to brace myself to be able to keep my balance, but I also need to be able to take good deep breaths. How am I going to do that? And that's why you have to work out your breathing muscles so that you can brace well, so that you're protecting your spine, so that you can actually have a good center of gravity, but so that your diaphragm is strong enough so that in the few seconds that you might be able to unbrace and catch your breath, you can.
Yeah, I can see that. So I think of it even deeper. Do you notice people holding their breath? Like I'm
All
thinking
the
of,
time. It's
yeah,
the worst.
yeah. How do you break that, I guess? Or yeah.
So, I mean, holding your breath is a stress response, and I
Okay.
don't teach breath holds unless they're part of a system of breathing. And I train them sort of more the way that yoga does, in that I don't want you holding your breath. Should you be suspending your breath at moments as part of a way to control your breath? Yes. But I don't do breath holds unless I'm working with sports that need breath holds, like surfing,
Yeah, free diving or something.
like
Yeah.
free diving, like MMA, or like firefighters that may, the wind may
Oh yeah.
change and you may get like a waft of smoke where you need to taking a deep breath at that moment's not a good idea. So I only do breath holds when it's specific to your sport and you've already showed me that your biomechanics are good, because holding your breath is a dysfunctional breathing style that too many people, because they're stressed out, are now doing, and it wreaks havoc on the biochemistry of your body.
Yeah, doesn't that, like, some people report getting panic attacks?
Absolutely. The biochemistry of your body and anxiety go hand in hand, and that is nothing new. One of my favorite books that explains that really well, hang on, let me see if I can go find it, is Robert Fried. He's been talking about anxiety and biochemistry forever.
Robert
Uh,
Fried.
Robert Fried. And it's something like the psychological and clinical implications of breathing dysfunction. It's got a very long. Oh, here we go. It's right up on my wall here. The psychology and physiology of breathing, Robert Fried. And this is not. It's a topic that has become trendy, but
Yeah.
there's lots of research about it. And hopefully a lot more will be coming as well, since we're now
Yeah.
interested about it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that seems like a very, I mean, I'm going to dive into that. Well, the reason why I'm glad that you said that is because I'll take back to when I mentioned the Wim Hof, because that brought me to that. Not to, I don't need to knock on that, because a good, great crew of bringing a recognition to breathing. But what I've seen with athletes is then they take that style of breathing and they chase a high, which is like counterproductive in, I guess, my viewpoint of it, is what are you trying to get out of it, And so I've never known I mean, I've just seen athletes try to do this, like they try to win in meditation, or they try to win in breath holding and those sort of things, which then we kind of go back to our old ways, right? And we don't get what we get out of it. But I have seen a lot of that, and I've noticed, I mean, just from reading up and researching, that can do a lot to trigger trauma or anything in those senses of doing breath holding. So it's cool to hear your perspective from that.
Listen, what you just said was really important, and I'm just going to encourage everyone to rewind and listen to that again.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really important. It's a piece of the puzzle that's been missing. And again, I have so much respect for anyone who's been tenacious enough to be, teaching breathing through times where it was not popular, and folks who are doing it ethically and, referencing. And there's amazing people out there teaching breathing. With Wim Hof, I so appreciate his bringing breathing to sort of to a popular place. However, I think that we have to be really careful, especially with us, that we work with athletes who are sympathetically driven people, so they're comfortable in a stressed out state because that's where they live.
Yeah.
And often, even if we know we're not supposed to be here in that state, is that if we're comfortable there, we'll go there. And that's also in psychology. If you're used to a lot of drama and chaos, often you'll surround yourself with that because at least you're most comfortable, and it's it's a place that you know the feeling of being in chaos.
Yeah. So you find peace in it because you've been there.
Yeah, I mean, it's at least it's you know what it feels like, and often when you take someone and you calm them down, they feel bored. And it's not bored, this is what calm feels like. So you have to kind of restructure the way you think. And it's not that it's not exciting, but like if you've been wired that way and you've been in that sympathetic place and you've been surrounded with people who you're competing with and that's where you live, it's hard to make yourself calm down and enjoy it. So really for me, I love, like, I'm not gonna say I love ice baths. I'll do them. I'm not one of those folks that loves them. I'm from Wisconsin. I've had enough snow and ice. I do love saunas. I do love going back and forth between them. I think being in the water and water workouts and just water in general is really good for your body and your soul. But I think that when you do an ice bath or something like that, you have to look at why you're doing it and have more data about whether you're doing it right. Because often I'll see people, and I'll go into a little bit of specifics with this, is that just because your face looks calm doesn't mean that you have taken that ice bath and you have changed it to have your body be calm through it. Like maybe you're just really good at having a calm face. Would be really good is to see your heart rate. So that heart rate doesn't lie. Is if you're in the ice bath and you're like looking super chill, like you can dominating, but your heart rate is really high, it is an exercise in something, but it's not that you've been able to change that experience and keep your heart rate down. So let's like throw heart rate into there and see how it's going.
Yeah, I'm happy you mentioned that because a lot of people who listen to our podcast specifically they dive into ice, which we use ice as a training tool too. And I always think of it, and I learned this through the process of training myself for years, but it is a sympathetic. So you have to, every decision you make, you're going to pay a price for, or you're going to have to have some sort of, you have to ask yourself, what am I trying to get? Are you adding stress to add stress? Because the ice is a stressor. So is a heat though too, right? I mean, those are stressors. So you have to look at that. Like if you do a heat ice day, I mean, that's a workout, and I see a lot of guys who want to do a lift that day or after, and they think of, you got to ask the question, is training and recovery one and the same? Are you that recovery session that you set in ice or set in a sauna, mentally we perceive that as relaxation, recovery, but I mean, go check your heart rate monitor, because you'll notice very quickly that was a training session.
Yeah, and also if you have a person who loves being in this alert sympathetic state, they get out of the ice, they feel great,
Yeah.
but is that really recovery? Just
Right.
because that's the place that they're happiest,
Yeah.
but you're really running the motor hard, and it's not necessarily recovery. Is it awesome? Like I'm so glad that, I mean, people have been doing ice baths for a long time. You
Oh,
see the pictures of the,
centuries.
yeah, I mean, as long as we've had ice. So it's
Yeah.
cool that it's coming back and we're not looking at, more medication or, things like that, that we're
Right.
actually looking to the basics: water, ice, heat, breath. I'm
Yeah.
psyched
Nature.
about that.
Yeah.
Nature's so good.
Nature.
But I
Yeah.
also think that when we think about putting ourselves in a stressful situation, and Brian McKenzie actually does some great discussions about this. This is not my strength. I actually send people over to him
Mm-hmm.
to talk about fear and how you deal with fear. But
Mm-hmm.
I in working with martial artists, and working with moms and with people with pain, is like, what do you do with pain? So just because you keep a calm face doesn't mean it's not having an effect on the inside of your body.
Mm-hmm.
Do you practice pain? Because if you practice pain, you get better at it for sure. Um, do you change the experience of pain? And does it go from being like insufferable to uncomfortable?
Mm.
Do you distance yourself from the pain so you actually pretend and try to be somewhere else? Or do you distract yourself from the pain? And I always use, for the concept of distracting yourself from the pain, when women who are in labor are given an ice cube.
Mm.
Like, they're given an ice cube
Yeah.
because the cold is distracting you from the pain. So,
Wow, I love
it's,
that analogy.
yeah.
That's a beautiful breakdown. Beautiful breakdown. Well, I guess there's a lot to think about, because if you're a high performer, pain ultimately, do you become immune to pain?
And the problem with that is that if you have a high tolerance for pain and you're
Yeah.
practicing pain,
Now you're in
how
trouble.
is that? That may, thank you for, yes, exactly. Is that now, are you distancing yourself from intuition that lets you know when you're going to be injured? So
Yeah.
that's what scares me, is that injury is our biggest foe.
Hmm.
As athletes, is like, our worst enemy is not the other team, it's being injured. Right.
Yeah.
I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
and that's the worst. So is constantly putting yourself in a sympathetic state, distancing yourself from that voice that's saying, hey, you know what, this lift doesn't feel right, or I need a couple seconds, or let me restart because something doesn't feel right, or there's some little nagging something in my back that I just need to, like, hang on a sec.
Yeah, I love, I mean, one of my favorite words is intuition. So every time you say that, I light up. But
Aw.
my eyes would be blinking if if we were sitting in the whatever the analogy was when you in the beginning. I'll have to re-listen to that and make sure see what my vision
What are you
was doing.
thinking? What are you thinking?
Yeah, right. But no, because if you look at the highest performers, they are very intuitive. And I look at I'm not going to use any names, but the guys who will be laughing, because I'm going to make a lot of guys listen to this, but people will be laughing when I say this, because I look at what we do, where we avoid and we disobey nature, right? Which at its core, nature is breath. It's very, and it's fun to study. Like, I really like studying nature and tying that into things, like simply like a tree. If you sit next to a tree, the tree is doing the opposite of what we're doing, but they're working together, right? Like, we're getting more
Mm-hmm.
oxygen from a tree. So go walk around a woods, and just whatever. Those are just things that I look at a lot. But as humans, if we don't understand the lowest hanging fruit of our body, the breathing, everything you're talking about, if we don't understand that, well, then now we're going to start reaching outside of nature, which is where you see the stimulants, which you see the Red Bulls, the Bang Energies, all the, not to hate on those companies, but you know what I'm saying. So you start
Mm-hmm.
reaching for pain pills, medication, all that sort of stuff, and everything comes at a cost. So now you're disobeying the natural part of your body, your being. And when you look at the highest performers, they don't burn all fuel at all costs to get a result. Like, they're very sustainable, and they have very sustainable systems, and they're very intuitive, and so I've always thought of it as, not always, I shouldn't say always at all. Recently, I've thought about performance as an intuitive thing. Like, should we be trying to get ourselves to intuitively know our mind-body connection well enough in the moment to almost design our training for that specific day?
Ooh, I think there's something for you to design there.
Yeah.
I think you have a project for yourself. I mean, and when you talk about baseball and sports where there's I don't have the vocabulary for baseball
Yeah.
as much as I'd like to, but it's so intuitive, whether whether you're pitching, whether you're trying to read a pitch, it's all intuition.
Mm-hmm.
So what is intuition? And I know that, when I was down in Baton Rouge and down at the Baseball Performance Lab, we had a discussion about telegraphing your pitch with your breath.
Wow.
And how someone who's watched tape or watched you pitch can learn. They may not be able to put it into words, but they're reading your breath to read your pitch. And that's intuition and
Mm-hmm.
sports intuition at its purest.
Oh, it really is. I love that. I love hearing you say that because of studying that, right? Wouldn't that be why we tell people to calm down? If we don't know anything about breathing, we tell them to take a deep breath. Do you think that that's where we get those myths even? Because we say, take a deep breath, and then you see the arms out, chest puffy,
Yeah.
but
And
we can
I do
see it.
want,
Yeah.
yeah, I do want you to take a deep breath, but I certainly
Right.
don't want, and even in boxing, you don't want to, your real pros will be able to tell when the person in front of them is going to strike, because you have to take a breath in order to exhale and hit, which
Mm-hmm.
is why you have to practice breathing in different. That's your initial question about rowing,
Yeah.
is that you actually have to practice in a lot of sports breathing in different directions so that people can't read what you're going to do.
Oh, wow.
Um,
That's really cool.
yeah, but I mean, taking the deep breath is important in calming and centering yourself,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe it doesn't have to be so deep that it changes and you're taking a vertical breath and taking a deep breath. Think about what happens to your body. It moves up a little bit and then down.
Mm-hmm.
And for sports like pitching or golf, that 2 millimeters is going to make a difference.
I love that. That makes so much sense too. Like I'm thinking about how just watch a hitter who looks at his bat and he takes that deep vertical breath and then steps in, or
Exactly.
does it during the pitch. Like that little, and we're talking about chasing edges here. That's a huge edge.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. And these are the conversations that make the last 2 years of writing this book that nearly drove me nuts worthwhile,
Mm-hmm.
because the chasing the edges is exactly. I mean, no, breathing is the middle,
Mm-hmm.
but it also is the edges, and those edges that are, the difference between winning and losing. Not that
Oh,
winning and
tremendously.
losing is everything,
Right. Well,
but it
yeah,
is.
yeah.
Yeah, it's that millimeter. It's that blade of grass. It's being in or out. It's those edges are super important. And if you're taking a breath that's going up and down, then your mechanics aren't consistent. So all the consistency and the practice that you've done, you're now, you know,
You are
disrupting
that.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you are your practice. Well, I know as we kind of tie a bow on it, we've taken a lot of your time, so thank you. But
Oh, no worries.
to finish it, I always like to, if I have the opportunity, I love asking guests to kind of circle in on themselves. So to bring it home, there's something really special to the MindStrong project. We call it the Diamond Series. It's basically you're going through a baseball diamond of your purpose, standards, systems, and vision, and it's always something to reflect on. But when I have the opportunity to ask you, and I think what your work is tremendously impactful on myself, so thank you for that. But more so of, I just really believe in the work you're doing, as I know so many other people do as well. And it's an edge that we can learn in our sports, our performances, that can help us in all of our lives, which ultimately, anything that we do, the platform of that is our teacher, and so if it weren't for my platforms, I wouldn't have gotten down the rabbit hole of getting to you. Maybe later on in life I would have, but I was past you. There's so many people that I respect, and and it's been amazing following your work, which is powerful. But to look at yourself as a whole. So when you're thinking about your personal life and the way that you're moving forward, I've always thought it's cool to ask people their purpose and why they do what they do, And so I'm curious, when you get up in the day and you've gone through these struggles of the early going of breathing, the perceptions, the framing, and you're chasing edges, teaching all these people, obviously there's a high level of intent of what you're willing to struggle for. And so in the moment, do you have the ability to articulate that on the podcast of what you found worth struggling for in your personal life and what's been able to sustain your purpose?
Wow, that's a super intense question. I thought you were going to ask me like my favorite documentary or what I'm reading now.
I'm sorry. You have me jacked up. You have me jacked
That's okay.
up. My head is I'm so excited to be talking to you.
I'm sure this is not going to be a coherent answer, but I come from 4 generations of teachers and professors.
Yeah.
And again, I thought I was going to be a DJ and a French major, but I've ended up being a teacher. And nothing makes me happier than being with a group of people that I'm teaching to then be able to go and teach. Mm. So my goal is not to have a thriving private practice, and that's not to say that that's not something that people should enjoy having, sure. But that's lonely to me. To me, to be able to teach people that then go off and have patients and clients and groups and can take this screening tool and help folks heal and believe in their bodies and feel strong and successful with what they own, their breath, their breathing, is why I do this. The teaching is so important to me, and it's thrilling because I do a teacher training now, which I didn't have in the past, but now I have one. But if each teacher can go and affect a couple hundred folks in their neighborhoods, and each of those people, and I get the stories all the time from my teacher trainees, come back and go like, I love my work because people get better and they tell me about it. So the amount of success and healing that's happening and rippling is so inspirational, no pun intended, that keeps me going. And it's the most important thing I have. I really I live and I breathe what I teach, and my standing by my students and standing by people that reach out to me for information that want to get better and believe they can get better and are looking for alternative ways to get better. It drives itself. I mean, I kind of stand still and let things come to me and answer them and give references and encourage as much as I can. And it's really deeply fulfilling.
That is so cool. So cool. Amazing answer. I mean, believe in it, and you did that to me, so thank you. Thank you on my side too. And I mean, to think of how you've established that sort of meaning, I mean, it's powerful, right? And that's what gets us to do amazing things, just kind of looking at it just for some substance too, for people who are listening, what are your standards of kind of how you track your breathing? How does that look in your life? Like, do you have a breathing practice? Is there a mental, physical stressor that you try to invite into your progress? What's your personal sort of journey look like in the health, nature, nutrition, social circle world?
You know what? I am trying to balance, my goals are trying to balance work-life balance for sure. Mm-hmm. Because like I keep saying, the last 2 years, I was pretty much, I was fairly isolated, which now being isolated again at a time where I don't have to be, it's a little rough, but we'll get through it. But trying to get a work-life balance. So now I'm just trying to get some time back for myself and go do things that are fun. And, because I was on this, go to the gym, write, be on the phone, go to the gym, right, be on the phone, try to meet deadlines. And now I'm actually trying to get back to a balance and trying to, like you said, bring some nature into it, because I live in a concrete jungle. I live in New York City, and I don't get to, Central Park is a park, but it's not like you ever let your guard down. So I'm really trying to get back to nature a little bit and have some fun. I know that's super simple, but when you go through times of stress of finishing a project or
Yeah.
whatever, you've got stuff going on with your family, and you come out the other end, you're like, okay, well, I now need to find myself again and have some fun and, do all kinds of good things to excess to just balance all the work I
Oh,
just did.
tremendously, tremendously. I think you're right on too. I think the whole world is going to benefit from the stillness. I really do. I think we'll come out of this as all of us, because there's just a lot of creation that's going to happen because we're all now forced to be still. And so, to kind of finalize it, with the breathing and the work that you're doing and the health, mind, body connection, we've touched on it a little bit of how it's starting to trend up. Where do you think this is all headed in the next couple of years? And from yourself, sorry, let me change that question. I don't want to answer that from a broad spectrum. Where are you taking this? Where do you see yourself going here in the future? What's the carrot out in front?
To me, to be able to have people that then bring it to the front line.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a coach and you can learn this,
Yeah.
and then affect all the team, like that to me is a beautiful thing. And
Wow.
I have that happen all the time where I have coaches reach out to me and say, I want to learn this so that I can teach my team. And that's exactly what I want, is I want it on the front lines, because it's been coming. We've had amazing researchers working through studies and putting together all this information. And now it's time that this go from the academic,
Yep.
to actually get to the gyms and the front lines and the teams. So
Awesome.
I'm excited because I actually feel like people are going to take their teams, do the breathing IQ on them, which is fast and cheap. It's actually free. And you can actually get a sense of how well your team is breathing, and then do some exercises and see the difference. So I'm really excited at seeing this actually get to gyms, get to clinics where people, all they need is a measuring tape, and some knowledge to be able to teach, and see people take it and run with it. I'm super excited. And then to continue the conversation, this book and what I do is tiny compared to the conversation and the research that's going to happen. I just hope to be able to create a platform so that people can start discussing. They don't even need to really agree, as long as they keep discussing and adding to the conversation.
Yeah,
that's my goal.
Add value. That is amazing. Well, I hope we can pass the torch of your goal and
thank
keep
you.
pushing it forward. So I, from my end, Doc, thank you so much for the time and to set aside time, especially right now with what's all going on. I was really pumped I was really pumped. I'm kind of fanboying right now, so I apologize. But I was so
No
pumped.
worries.
I was pumped to get to this day because I just I knew I was excited to listen to you and ask you questions. So, but more so, I always like to thank people for their time. That form of leadership is tremendously valuable, and I don't take that for granted. So I just thank you for jumping on with me and sharing a really fun conversation. And I know it'll help a lot of people we may never meet or talk to. So, I'm looking forward to getting this out into the world and passing the torch. But more than anything, myself and MindStrong, thank you so much for sharing a conversation and sharing the morning with me.
It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, how can people take, for the final here, do the shameless plug here? How can people find you? How can people get in touch with you?
The breathing class is my website, because that's what it is, a breathing class. And I just started a Facebook Warriors discussion page where folks can just throw up questions, and I'll do Facebook Live. So I wanted to have a forum for folks to just be able to post questions and speak to each other, and for me to be able to do some Facebook Lives and answer questions. I love having questions thrown at me. So there is a page that you just have to sign up for. And then, like I said, on podcasts and on interviews, I give away all those nuggets. I want people to take them. I want people to share them. So yeah, it's all out there. There's no secrets. And you can get all the information from listening to podcasts and going on the website for sure. And buying the book if you'd like.
There you go. Well, just chime in, folks, and get into some breathing. So, Doc, thanks again. Have a good rest of your day. And I'm sure I will be talking to you soon. Cheers. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Ah,
Hey,
there
that
we
was
go.